Thomas is not afraid of controversy, and in 2020, he initiated a collective text that had a huge impact, a letter on justice and open debate in Harper's Magazine, signed by 150 intellectuals of all backgrounds. This text denounced cancel culture and illiberalism on both the left and the right. At that time, few on the left were defending free speech, despite the dismissal of numerous academics, artists, journalists, and stand-up comedians who had fallen victim to cancellation. Today, Thomas keeps defending freedom of speech, although dismissal and cancellation come massively from the right. He has published a new book, Summer of Discontent, The Age of Certainty and the Demise of Discourse. He looks back on the summer of 2020, and in particular on the murder of George Floyd and its consequences. This moment, marked also by COVID, is a historical turning point, and Thomas will explain why. He will speak for about 10 minutes, then I will discuss with him a little, and the audience will be able to ask him questions and buy his book at the entrance. Thomas, this is the third time you have accepted my invitation to La Maison. The first time was in 2021 to participate in 3 days of debates on free speech and liberté d'expression in the fields of religion, gender, and race. At the time, I was told, "You're crazy, you'll get cancelled." But there were 3,000 listeners on Zoom, it's just time of COVID, and many diverse opinions were expressed. That's something I would like to say, because in this time of threats, we fear of being cancelled constantly. I think that perhaps the biggest danger is self-censorship. Of course, I know it's easy to say that, but well, I think we shouldn't be afraid of launching debates and being very critical about all what is happening. A year ago, you came back to debate the end of affirmative action, and today you are presenting your book at NYU. Thomas is also an alum of NYU, journalism. Yeah. So, Thomas, Shana Tova, and please join me in welcoming Thomas Chatterton Williams.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here. You could be. I've learned with President Macron and Albertine. So this really means a lot that you chose to come here tonight. And merci beaucoup, François. It's a pleasure to be back here. The events of the past 2 weeks in the wake of the horrific assassination of the conservative activist Charlie Kirk have driven home for me the stakes of the ideas and arguments underpinning Summer of Our Discontent. That is to say, we should be able to see quite clearly that there are real and grave consequences for our society when discourse breaks down. When, driven by moral certainty, we allow ourselves to be divided into ideological teams, when we decide that our opponents are no longer worthy or deserving of disagreement and debate. From the outset, I want to insist that this book is not, as some critics have asserted, simply a complaint about the left, or more precisely, a complaint about a comparatively privileged and influential slice of society's penchant for fashionable anti-racist manners and neologisms, or radical new theories about identity and justice. Nor is it, as some other critics have implied, a merely perfunctory rebuke of the left for the sake of emphasizing the greater threat from the Trumpist right. Nor is it even intended as an exercise in whataboutism rooted in the futile and fleeting desire to see the other side. Ultimately, this book is concerned with a far more tragic, enduring, and universal tendency to forget the blessings of liberal democracy. It has been our puzzling fate not just to inherit, but to voluntarily repeat the mistakes of previous generations, to flirt with their hatreds and prejudices, to romanticize their limitations and grievances, and worst of all, to dismantle the very norms and safeguards the wisest among them strove so valiantly to construct for us. Summer of Our Discontent is a journey through the past 2 decades of our cultural and political history, a fraught task. But I specifically wanted to understand how this country, which had afforded me so much more opportunity and recognition than it had my ancestors, and which seemed to me to be moving incrementally, but undeniably towards a greater perfection of its shining promise, could, in the space of several short years, so thoroughly come undone through a national storytelling project of almost boundless disillusionment and resentment. I wanted to understand why, when by so many measures, things appeared more egalitarian than ever before, particularly in the nation's most elite and self-consciously diverse and inclusive spaces, why an inexhaustible supply of attention and energy was being devoted to poring over and dissecting the minutest of slights and disparities. An insight from Alexis de Tocqueville, the great 19th century French observer of American life, has always stayed with me. He seemed able to explain a big part of what I was witnessing in real time. For Tocqueville, unfulfilled rising expectations create unstable political situations. This explains why, for example, the strongholds of the French Revolution were in regions where standards of living had been improving and not the reverse. It is not always by going from bad to worse that a society falls into a revolution, he wrote in 1856. It happens most often that a people which has supported without complaint, as if they were not felt, the most oppressive laws, violently throws them off as soon as their weight is lightened. In my view, the Tocqueville paradox, as it's called, crystallized the spirit of the entwined social justice movements that began in earnest during the second term of the Obama administration, gathered strength throughout the resistance to Trump's first term, and climaxed during the pandemic summer of racial reckoning in 2020. The illiberalism unleashed by progressives during the Great Awakening, or whatever we might call that feverish period of excess, alarmed me at the time. The lack of regard for fundamental components of the liberal society, from freedom of expression to tolerance of opposing views, to a belief in due process and the extension of grace even to one's foes, seemed perilously short-sighted then. Are you really willing to throw these safeguards to the wind because you sense your side is ascendant now? That was a question more than a few of us posed when we published this letter in Harper's Magazine, arguing for restraint. One of the most apparently controversial aspects of Summer of Our Discontent, which, like the Harper's letter, I don't believe should be controversial at all, is the idea that cultural and political shifts never take place in a vacuum. To downplay and excuse disorder and violence in one context, whether you like it or not, is to set the precedent for its excuse in another context that may violate your sense of justice. In the same way, the punitive censoriousness being implemented and celebrated from the right today must necessarily be understood in relation to the left-wing variant that had immediately preceded it. I would add that it should also be understood in terms of the left-wing overcorrection it can't help but invite. In On Liberty, John Stuart Mill contrasted the power of social tyranny with that of government tyranny, and concluded that the former was much more dangerous. In his words, but reflecting persons perceived that when a society is itself the tyrant, society collectively, over the separate individuals who compose it, its means of tyrannizing are not restricted to the acts which it may do by the hands of its political functionaries. Society can and does execute its own mandates. And if it issues wrong mandates instead of right, or any mandates at all in things with which it ought not to meddle, it practices a social tyranny more formidable than many kinds of political oppression. Since, though not usually upheld by such extreme penalties, it leaves fewer means of escape, penetrating much more deeply into the details of life and enslaving the soul itself. The tyranny of the left that Summer of Our Discontent concerns itself with was precisely that social tyranny. It was pervasive and insidious. Ultimately, though, it was refuted far more by its successes than its failures. Through its decade and a half of unsparing dominance, it taught the country that no one actually likes defunded police departments or women's sporting events that disadvantage our daughters. In this way, it begat the sweeping cultural and political reaction we are currently enduring, which has so drastically intensified, and I would argue is being powerfully exploited in the days following the killing of Charlie Kirk. The question my book did not have the chance to address, but the answer to which I fear we are now finding out, is whether Mill was really correct about the relative preferability of the kind of tyranny that the government can unleash. I think we'll be finding that out soon. Thank you very much, and I look forward to being in conversation. I see my friend and mentor Paul Berman back there.
Yeah. So I think that we all understand your concern about the abuse of a specific conception of social justice, referring to race. And perhaps you could describe what you consider to be the perversions of the demand for social justice. But how should we think about the issues of social inequality without thinking of racial inequality? Because even if we distance ourselves from the systematic analysis in terms of race, we still face the persistence of racism everywhere and racial disparities. So because of course we could think that that's not the only reason, and that perhaps also we forgot the economic disparities, but well, yes, the inequalities and disparities between people from different colors, it still exists. So what do you do with that?
Well, one of the points that I really tried to spend some time on in the book is what struck me as clearly obvious, that the most salient identity that George Floyd possessed was that he was fundamentally a poor man. In America, of course, race and class overlap quite a bit, and histories of oppression leave residues in society. And it would be naive, perhaps, to suggest that his poverty had nothing to do with the fact that his ancestors had been enslaved and had been denied the chance to accumulate wealth. I come from a family in which, my father was unable to buy a home at times because of redlining practices and things like this. I'm not naive that way. But the society is quite dynamic, and especially in the 21st century, the racial lens is not sufficient for understanding the gaping inequalities in society. And sometimes when we fetishize or overemphasize the racial lens, we miss important differences both between groups and within groups. And so, I keep coming back to this quote from the great French thinker, Raymond Aron, which he says these utopian projects are refuted more by their successes than by their failures. And I think that one of the things that we've seen in recent years is the way that elite members of oppressed or thought to be oppressed groups capture most of the methods of addressing the oppression, where the actual impoverished and the actual subaltern of the group do not. So one thing that I noticed and that really seemed maddening during the summer of 2020 was that here an impoverished man died in a situation that almost no Black person in America would actually find themselves in, strung out on drugs, really in a bad way, out of work, using a counterfeit banknote because he didn't have a $20 bill. And, that was used for people to say, because this man died this way, fund my play on Broadway. Because this man died this way, I deserve a MacArthur Fellowship. So the idea that everybody had an interchangeable racial experience and racial harm, I thought actually didn't just get it wrong, it actually obstructed the effort to make a difference where it matters most.
Okay. But precisely, we can also understand that there is a so-called elite of oppressed people, and that's the main part of oppressed people are still oppressed. That's well on
lower classes. So do you mean that, well, we should get rid of this lens, this approach on social poverty, that we should get rid of the racial criteria?
I would be, yes, I would be, and I wrote a long piece that that got buried in the news cycle. I wrote a long piece on affirmative action in the Atlantic at the moment that Elon Musk and Donald Trump had a huge fight, and so nobody was talking about anything else for 2 days but that. But yes, I've spent a lot of time really asking myself where I come down on this issue, because it hadn't been something that I'd always concerned myself with, and I had been surprised by some of the older Black writers and thinkers who I look up to, who have a variety of views and reactions on this question. But it does seem to me that the best way to address some of these problems would be to focus on social inequality tout court, and you would capture quite a lot of the specific racial harm, because the fact of this country is that non-white people are disproportionately socially impoverished. But you would also be able to have a system that everybody could buy into and feel is equal. It would also capture quite a lot of white poverty, which is numerically enormous. And I think even within groups, it would do a lot to quell the sense that affirmative action doesn't actually work for us. One of the things that was so notable in the election of 2024 was the kind of gains that Trump was able to make with working class Blacks and Latinos, who, if journalists took the time to talk to them, actually said like they weren't actually huge fans of affirmative action or DEI because they had never seen any benefits of these policies. So they didn't even understand what those policies were doing in their name. And they were attracted more to the vision that Trump was proposing, which I think was obviously a mistake, but they were alienated from the kind of etiquette and manners and gatekeeping habits that the elites on the left were imposing, supposedly in their name and for their benefit.
Okay, and I think you became very French because by focusing, on the economic inequalities more than, because that's a debate, as you know, in France. Right. And I would say, yeah, we must not forget, even, well, in France, now the left is also influenced by, this identity politics, but with 10 years late, as usual. So speaking of identity, do you think that it's possible, or is it just a utopia, to escape in the US categorization? I would like to quote your book. Many of our seemingly most intractable problems arise in no small part from having learned to see and understand ourselves as part of an overwhelming monolithic abstraction, enormous categorization of color, sex, gender, race, religion, mistaking our own interests for the purported ends of the identity block we've been arbitrarily assigned to. This is true across the culture, whether the ill-conceived identity politics of the left or the spiteful populism of the right. Could you elaborate on the once again? Do you think that it's possible, especially, well, considering the past of the United States and this perhaps inescapable sin of segregation?
Sure. Well, it's complicated in this country. But, I don't mean to suggest that if Black people, for example, stopped identifying as Black, that would solve the problem of racism in America. But I do think that the case should be made that actually quite a lot of harm is done to all of us. And I wish I could claim credit for coming up with that, but that's James Baldwin. Quite a lot of harm is done to all of us when we believe that we are white or we are Black, and we believe that divides us or makes it impossible for us to transcend those categories and love across those boundaries and see each other as fellow Americans. So one of the worst aspects of, there's a pragmatic aspect to this. One of the worst aspects of, I think, minority groups taking this kind of Pyrrhic victory of identity politics that really was dominant in the 2010s and peaked in 2020 and now is in retreat. One of the things that really harmed our society, I believe, was that for a period of time, every group was advocating for itself in the name of its group as such. I was told on Twitter by Nicole Hannah-Jones, a prominent journalist at the New York Times Magazine, that everybody knows what it means to be politically Black. And you might be racially Black, but you need to be politically Black. And people were encouraged to be politically Black. People were encouraged to be politically Latino. And for a period of time, there was a kind of conventional wisdom that white people needed to sit this one out because of the way that our history is. Unfortunately, a lot of us predicted, and I think it's really come to pass, that at some point, enough white people would say that they actually wanted to advocate for themselves as an identity block. There's quite a lot of them in society. And we are in the midst of a kind of explosion of white people saying that they are advocating for their own interest as white people, that they are tired of being replaced, and that they are in fact being replaced, and that they're tired of having their jobs and their positions taken by DEI, and they are mobilized. And so it's not to say that they are correct, it's just to say that this is tearing our society apart. And it is, I think, one of the failures of this moment that I trace in the book is kind of like the high point that I thought was just the direction of our history. This moment that Barack Obama showed us or tantalized us with in the early 2000s, that we were on pace to reach a kind of post-racial, multi-ethnic future where we wouldn't advocate for ourselves as such. We would find ways to think of ourselves and each other as Americans and have a new story that wouldn't forget the past oppressions, but that wouldn't be bound to them. It seems that we're very far away from that now, and I don't think that the blame can be not laid at all at the feet of the kind of identity politicians that taught everybody to think first and foremost of themselves as an aggrieved group, as an identity block that has grievances to balance against other groups' claims.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And in the same way, can we escape also this Hegelian or Marxist paradigm that opposes constantly the oppressor and the oppressed, black and white, colonists against indigenous people, and because of course it seems to have become a kind of framework for interpreting all the political issues. But how to go beyond this? Because is it in the name of the universal that you try to go beyond these oppositions? Well, and is it just a wish, or how is it possible? But in the reality, not just by saying yes, we should be all consider ourselves as a part of the same larger community than our race and our ethnicity, but well, there's just perhaps just wishful thinking.
Well, I mean, it may be wishful thinking where we are now, but it's also quite practical. When you reduce reality, when you oversimplify reality to these binaries, racist, anti-racist, colonizer, indigenous, oppressor, oppressed, you miss all of the complexity that actually is driving a lot of the kind of actual political feelings and debates. What does it mean to say Jews are the oppressors when there are many Jews who disagree with, there are many Jews who are taking the pro-Palestine position. So what does it mean to say that is the Jewish point of view, or to say that I think one of the kind of most flattening binaries was the racist, anti-racist paradigm that obtained under Ibram X. Kendi's tutelage in 2019, 2020, when we were told that there's an anti-racist interest that Black people have, which is fewer police in their neighborhoods. And then the murders skyrocket, and you actually have the people that actually live in those neighborhoods advocating for increased police presence. So there's actually no such thing as a Black point of view on that. Some Black people thought there should be fewer police, and many Black people thought there shouldn't be. And this is with women's issues. There's the Muslim scholar with the critique of Islamism whose voice is just as authentic. So these binaries reduce the actual complexity of our lives as they're lived, at the same time that they increase a kind of a cross-group animosity. So I just don't think it practically works for how we want to actually understand our societies if we don't want to just silence debates. Oftentimes the binaries are a way of trumping debate, ending debate. I have, you're a colonizer, I'm indigenous, you have to be quiet. I have a kind of epistemological authority over you based in my identity. And so that hasn't served us well.
So let's go back to censorship in the US. That's just my feeling as perhaps as a French guy, but I feel that there are two types of censorship. One's come from the right, and it's vertical,
Yeah.
It comes from the top, and the president or an authority say, well, you're fired. Huh?
Yeah.
Dismissed. So, or for example, in the South, the ban on books, dealing with the gender or anyway.
With anything that makes people uncomfortable in certain situations.
Yeah. So that's vertical.
Broad.
But there is another kind of censorship coming from the left. It's more horizontal, meaning collectively a community decides to exclude the people or to change the books and the way they have been written in the past, change the language, the way of speaking. So what do you think around this distinction? Is it correct?
Yeah. I mean, I tried to get at that a little bit in the opening remarks on John Stuart Mill. I mean, Mill's argument was that the social tyranny that's horizontal is much more stifling because it reaches you in aspects of your daily life. Anybody, I don't know how many people in here are too online or on Twitter very much, but anybody who spent a lot of time on social networks knows that the kind of tyranny that can be imposed and the kind of self-censorship it induces in a user can be very powerful indeed. But I think, I've started to think about this quite differently in the past week and a half even. I think that you can't downplay how insidious it is to see the vice president telling people to inform on each other, or to see an elected congressman in Florida saying that anybody who's speaking critically of Charlie Kirk, report them to my office. If they're a state employee, they will be fired. And I've fired 2 people already. Like, that is probably numerically less likely, but it is really, really bad.
Yeah, really scary.
So I think these are, it's like out of the frying pan into the fire. These are, neither situation is ideal. The ideal situation is that everybody embraces a kind of more neutral view that, the way to defeat bad ideas or to counter them is with more speech, more ideas, to expose them to better thinking, to try to persuade, to try to negotiate and compromise. And that's not being served by the illiberalism and extremism on either side.
Yeah, sure. So, Thomas, you know that. Are you aware that you play an important political role in the US, also in France, regarding this debates on wokeism, especially in France? And I would like to have also your feedback about the importance of this debate in France, because it's crazy, how French, and from the left and from the right, say, well, no, that's wokeism, that's a plague, it's horrible, it comes from the US, and so I would like to hear about that and your impression. But also I would like to question the fact that you are an extraordinary, I would say, tightrope walker, because on the one hand you are a liberal who criticizes woke and wokeism, and on the other hand you are horrified by the danger of right-wing authoritarianism from Trump. So you have enemies on both sides. No? But how do you feel? Is it complicated to?
It's lonely.
To pick this position and to be, independent and balanced.
It's lonely to not be on a team, which is why I think people often are attracted to teams more than out of conviction, even is out of a sense of camaraderie. I watched so many people in 2020 who were liberals or called themselves liberals or heterodox and centrist. I watched so many of these people, the more they argued with the left, they didn't stay in a center position. They began to feel welcomed by aspects of the right wing that they had previously not seen as allies. But those were the people that said, you can sit at our table. And I guess even among intellectuals, it's human nature to not want to sit by yourself at the cafeteria table. So it really is. Like people, it's hard. People don't like to not be on a team, clearly. And there's a lot of also, there's professional advantages to properly playing the team sport. But I think, if you don't, I just personally think that if you don't say what you genuinely believe, then this is not a great job. In a lot of ways, you should be like a corporate lawyer, or you should be an agent in Hollywood or something. But if you're doing this work, like the thing that you can do is say what you genuinely believe and try to persuade people. But and I think you should always be open to rethinking your positions. I have a chapter in the book that started as a piece that I did in the Atlantic when I was actually at the Tocqueville Chateau in Normandy at a conference that really opened my eyes. It was a conference that was really on wokeness, and some really prominent French intellectuals were there, namely like Alain Finkielkraut. And there was maybe 3 days of talking about wokeness. Is this a problem in France? Is this I'm pretty critical of wokeness, but I was sitting in the audience getting kind of alarmed because it was, it actually, and at one point, a French journalist and activist who I just knew by name but hadn't known at the time, Rokhaya Diallo, got up on stage, and she said something really anodyne, like you wouldn't bat an eye at this in America. She said, I'm not denying universalism, but I have some experiences, and I look at it, and I'm the only Black woman here. I'm certainly the only Muslim, and I think some of my experiences inform how I think about some of these debates. And she was shut down not just by the panelists, but also by the moderator, who said, "I feel threatened as a citizen when you speak that way." Wow. She said it's a kind of social domination, and I won't have it. And I just thought, like, France could get a little more woke. And America could get less woke, and there would be like this amazing multi-ethnic society in between, because both of these societies have such great kind of universal traditions and ideas about democracy to show us. But America kind of can fetishize identity too much, and France can kind of shut it down before you even get to even speak about it. It also, there's a kind of emblematic instance, and then I think you'll see what I'm saying. Laïcité. I agree with laïcité, but there's a kind of hard laïcité, and I think there would be a kind of more flexible laïcité that would meet people where their lives actually are. And there was this kind of image that startled me in the 2010s, I guess it was 2015 or 16, of a middle-aged, maybe a 55-year-old Muslim mother on the beach in Nice in a burkini, and this is in the period of time when a wave of attacks had happened in French society, and society was heightened about Islam, and there was kind of crackdown on any type of religious dress in public. And this led to a scene where a couple of police officers ended up waking up a peaceful sleeping woman on the beach and telling her that her options were to either disrobe or to go home, but she couldn't stay on the beach sleeping and minding her business, covering her arms and her neck. And I think you've really lost the plot if you've gotten that universal and anti-indulgent of difference.
So if you say you, that means that you address me as a French. So I will.
No, one has one.
Okay. Because I will answer as a French, It's not usual. But well, just the fact that, yes, I totally agree with you that this use of laicity, what you don't have even a word in English about that. You have secularism, that is not the same. But anyway, that's at the beginning, laicity is a way of, getting rid of the religious power, of church, and to make all the religion and non-religious people respect it, you know.
Right.
That's, and I agree with the fact that it became perhaps too strict, and that it's not respecting, but it's disrespecting the some religion. But you know, in France, religion is a private thing, so you can say what you want about religion. Because blasphema, it doesn't exist in France.
For sure.
Yeah. So you can say horrible thing about religion. It's totally okay because that's freedom of speech, you know. But well, I feel that in the US immediately, you know, oh no, you know, that's no, you cannot say anything about religion because it's blasphemy. But blasphemy, you know, it's a religious notion, you know, that doesn't exist.
It's very important. What the French did, and you know, that comes out of their relationship with the Catholic Church before there were really any Muslims to speak of in French society. But what I mean is, I agree.
We
like,
have Charlie Hebdo. We have Charlie Hebdo. But you were not allowed, you know, even in the New York Times, to show any kind of caricature. You know, it's merely a blasphemy.
I just think we have to have a kind of a principle, and the principle of laïcité is one that I adhere to. But it has to be able to be supple enough to meet people where they actually live, and something about the degree to which it can be enforced, where you actually wake up a person that's trying to participate in public life, or the mother who would like to not be hidden away at home, but would like to take her children on a field trip, as our children and friends are always going on, would like to participate, but cannot if she has to choose between, if she has to take off the scarf, she can't participate, and then you might miss out on ever bringing her fully into society. So I think there has to be a balance, right?
I agree with you, Thomas. So, well, don't you think that we could say that we are woke, and at the same time, woke meaning that we are aware of social injustice, but not wokist, you know, as we say in French, in France, wokist, woke, you know, so that we must be at the same time, I'm not Macronist, but en même temps, woke and anti-woke.
Yeah, I do think so. I mean, I think that, you know, in theory, France has the system that you would have to say is the preferable one, which is that it does not officially recognize race, and that everybody is simply a French citizen. In practice, life is messier than that, and that type of way of thinking about things can lead you not to know if there's a kind of discrepancy in the criminal justice system where young Algerian men are racially profiled and arrested at rates that are unfair. But in theory, you would want to have a society that has the French principles. I 100% agree with that. And I think Macron, in his speech against separatism, was that 2020 or 2021? I thought he was very compelling when he said, they are, you know, through the internet and through this kind of social justice way of speaking, that's the American way of speaking, ideas and ways of thinking about ourselves and each other are being imported from America, that are not our way of thinking about our society or making our society, and it's not helpful. And I try to get into the book. I think that's very true. I think that it's very strange to see this specifically American idea of race and of white supremacy and structural racism and things like this be grafted onto societies that have different colonial histories, different immigrant groups within their societies. It's a very big distinction that France had colonies with slavery, but that the slavery was never within the borders of the nation itself. And America is a nation, one of the reasons why we have such a different relationship to color and ancestry is because in America, a drop of black blood was the difference between being free or unfree. So it takes on a different kind of valence here. I think that it is inappropriate when the rest of the world thinks about all questions of social justice through the American lens. But I can understand also why in France some people thought, we don't have the words right now to describe experiences that we sense to be true, and if I say I can't breathe, I'm articulating some experience that I'm feeling here, but we don't have that idiom yet here. And so it's helping them, it's giving them a vocabulary for something they want to express, but it's not a perfectly good fit.
Yeah. concretely, just about a specific question, would you support in France the ethnic statistics? Because it's forbidden. And of course,
Rightfully so.
And we should know exactly by numbers, what are the discrimination in France. But on the other hand, say, okay, we don't want to define people, citizens.
You don't want to count the Jews. It comes from that. It comes from World War II and rounding up Jews. In France, I think very rightly said, we won't count people again because it can lead to monstrous consequences. I am in favor of that very much. I think that is ultimately correct. But I think, again, there has to be this kind of compromise. There has to be a sense that that does not mean that racism doesn't exist or prejudice or these things, which I think in France, I've actually had these kind of conversations or been on stage with Rokhaya subsequently where just this summer, I was in Turkey, in Istanbul, near Bodrum with Rokhaya Diallo speaking, and a very bourgeois, very intelligent French woman from the 16e raised her hand and said, "This is all lies. Like there is no racism in France. Like, period." That was just a statement that and I think that's just astonishing. And she kind of said, like, we don't keep statistics, we don't see this way. And it was an amazing conversation because we were talking together in a dialogue about how Rokhaya's experience had been that, she simply tries to say, I may have a different perception of reality based on my experiences. And a woman stood up to tell her, no, your perception of reality isn't right. Yeah. This is what it is. And completely made a meta kind of proof of her point. So I think there's a kind of too easy sense sometimes in France that racism has been solved.
Of course. So the audience will take over, but just perhaps a last question, because we are in La Maison Française, where we talk about French intellectuals and also writers, thinkers. And in your book, Summer of Discontent, you refer to French authors such as Tocqueville, Raymond Aron, and also Albert Camus. And I would like, it's not just because I would like to hear you flatter France, but I'm
happy to do that.
Okay. But how these thinkers inspired you?
Well, like many American students, I struggled for a long time with the foreign language requirement in school, but it ended up sending me to try to graduate. I went to Tours for a summer, and I fell in love with the culture and the sense of being in France. And then that created a kind of lifelong relationship where I kept going back. I have a lot of French friends, and I really began reading. I studied philosophy, so I was always interested in some of these French thinkers, and I just felt very at home, very welcomed. I also feel like I participate to an extent in the all-American tradition of going to Paris and being quite welcomed as a Black American, and sometimes feeling even. I don't want to make it seem like I was escaping racism in America, because that would be more my father's experience, but when I would go to France, I would feel that I was perceived first and foremost as myself. I was from someplace. My national identity was often more important than whatever people thought of my racial identity. Oftentimes they were not aware of exactly where I was from, and they would ask me where I was from, and they would sometimes think I was from the Maghreb or something like that. But I was able to be an individual and exist outside of the all-American skin game in ways that felt very liberating to me. And just over the years, I fell in love really with Camus, most of all, just because I think he was just a beautiful man in every way. Maybe not in every way, not in the way that he treated his long-suffering wife, maybe, but morally he modeled a kind of humility that I really don't see anywhere else. He said something that has always stayed with me, because the woke overlords of his era were like the Saint-Germain-des-Prés philosophes at the Café de Flore, Sartre and Beauvoir, and these people who were really like making his life miserable over the war in Algeria and the fact that he wasn't taking a stance. And at one point he said, they said, you're from Algeria, you need to speak on this. And he said, maybe I need to be quiet on this because I'm biased, because my identity is caught up in this and I might not be seeing this as clearly if I stepped back and had some distance and wasn't bound up. I am Algerian, I have a point of view, I care about, people I know there, and I might not have the most accurate perspective. And you just don't hear anybody say that. In fact, the kind of era that I'm writing about, you have people say, you need to be silent, speaking as I have the authority here, you can't contradict me. I have a kind of identity epistemology that I can wield over you. And so I just think, in addition to beautiful sentences, that kind of courageous ability to stand alone and contradict the fashionable ideas of his time are inspiring. And of course, if you look now, I imagine you'd agree, he's aged much better than Sartre and some of these others.
Okay, it's your time to ask a question.
Statistics.
Was that?
And he collected a lot of statistics on Algeria.
Yeah, he did do that. You're right. For the in Kabylie, right? Yeah, that's true.
Time for question. Who would like to? The first question, please.
I hate to be the first question. Well, thank you for your talk. I haven't read your book, so forgive me, I'm going to ask a question about it and separately about your own intellectual inquiry. It's a bit of a digression, but there's a book by Alistair Cook. He was a British journalist that chronicled America post-war, 1941 and 1942. And the basic question in the book was, when the war started vamping up, or the thesis is when the war started vamping up, to understand how the war was impacting America from the perspective of the discourse in DC would have been very shallow. And he proceeded to go on a tour of the country to see how the war was transforming the people there. And I think about that a lot in the context of the last 8 years, because a lot of the discourse that shaped our politics and that shaped our governance was created online and also in very elite circles. I mean, that's the crisis that kind of led to the rise of the right. People in America live incredibly different lives. They think about issues incredibly differently. Even me, I was born and raised in New York City. My partner is from Alaska. He was a fisherman, commercial fisherman for 8 years. His whole community, I mean, it's parallel worlds. And so, on the one hand, I wonder, our politics is shaped by the elite. On the other hand, and you're not a policymaker, I recognize this, but I wonder how much of the solution to our discourse is by decentering it. And so in your research or in your writing, how much were you in conversation with, I guess, like, there's many ways we can frame these divides, urban, rural, different states, different cultures. And also, do you see that as part of the solution? Or, I mean, is there, America has many things going for it, has many things against it. How much can that be part of the solution, which is kind of building a national narrative, like actually going local again?
Well, I do think that the solution is to focus more on local community. I think one of the things that's perverted our politics and culture so much is the nationalization of every disagreement and debate. You have people who live in towns that don't have any immigrants, and immigration is their #1 issue because because they're on Team Red, and that's and so I think that's been very poisonous. And I think that people should, this is a kind of conservative argument, but take care of your family, be a strong pillar of your community, like focus on your region, scale it up and up and up, but that would strengthen society. And of course, I believe that we need to think better about national storytelling projects that we all can buy into, and that out of many one. But I did travel the country a bit, and I went to Portland, Oregon, and did some reporting there. And I actually had a long chapter outside of Atlanta, Georgia, where I spent some time talking to some Black women and their partners who were so disillusioned from what had happened when George Floyd died that they pooled their money together to buy a plot of land, and they wanted to actually make a new segregated Black town, which, their response to racism was kind of to do, my dad grew up in the segregated South, and that would be the last thing in the world he would ever do to oppose racism, is to resegregate himself. But I really wanted to understand what they were thinking. That chapter, unfortunately, didn't make it into the book. But I did talk to a lot of people, but this book specifically is focused on the sense that ideas really matter, and is trying to make sense of the ideas and events that shaped the past 2 decades. And I would say that I think that institutions, even if they are elite and most people don't interact with them, they really do permeate the larger culture. And that's why you can see that, when Trump and Stephen Miller and Christopher Rufo and these people decided that they were going to attack Harvard and Columbia, that was met with widespread support, because there is a sense that these institutions do have a huge effect on the conversations that we're all having. And when the New York Times and the media is being attacked, that goes way beyond the size of and scope of those institutions. So I think those things have to be taken seriously, because they actually do shape our collective culture. When you see the response to the killing of Charlie Kirk, and you see how they talk about them, or they, or Elon Musk says they want you dead, and all of these people who are living in communities that have never interacted with a New York Times reporter or a Harvard professor say that's exactly right, they do. The left, they hate us. So those things we have to take seriously, whatever it is that happens in those institutions that makes plausible that kind of reaction to them, even if we just want to understand how to counteract it.
Hello, thank you also for the talk. So my question is, what is your, I'm a journalist by trade, and so last summer during the Republican convention, I was there covering it. And they're very, very good at the coining those two or three little things that are going to completely panic an entire society. You're gonna drop off your daughter in the morning at school and she's gonna come home a boy, or seriously, and people really reacting, and they believe it, and the way the direction of the media is going now, being co-opted and owned by billionaires and that sort of thing. Do you see this as I know the pendulum is swinging so far in one direction now, but is there a way to level it, for it to be back in the center? I mean, I just think that everything is completely out of control.
Oh, I agree with you. Well, for it to be back in the center, someone would have to decide to stop picking up the sword and using it on their opponent when they have access to it. And the sad thing is that the right from the very top all the way down, doesn't seem to have much desire for that. I've been really amazed, actually. Christopher Rufo, this activist, spent the past decade arguing against cancel culture. And right after Trump got sworn in, he wrote an article in the City Journal saying, I'm actually second guessing my critique of cancel culture. I think this is a really powerful tool that we should use. Just said that outright, Donald Trump at Kirk's memorial, when he wasn't talking about tariffs, said Erica Kirk, she wants to forgive, but actually, I don't want to forgive anybody. I hate my opponents and I don't wish the best for them. Yeah. The message is coming from all the way at the top. We can't actually study the pendulum in the center without some kind of political leadership that, we can write all the open letters forever, but you have to actually have some political leaders who would come into power or would be able to persuade Americans to vote for them, and then would decide not to use some of these tools when they're made available to them. And I'm hoping that we will have enough of a bad experience with this kind of vindictiveness and kleptocracy that takes advantage of kind of populist resentment to enrich a small group of people. I hope that we'll have enough of a bad experience with that we'll want sane leadership again. But I don't see, the Republican Party is completely captured by a cult of personality around this demagogue. And the Democrats, after the the weekend at Bernie's presidency, where we don't even know who is making decisions, have not produced a viable alternative yet that most of the country could get behind. So right now, I don't think the pendulum is settling in the middle.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for this. Kind of a two-part question. I'm curious about like kind of your development of your own political ideals throughout your life. You know, I've found myself, you know, I started out quite left and, you know, leaning more towards the center and, you know, trying to reach out to more of my friends and gather them and, you know, explain that, you know, centrism is really beneficial for a lot of us. And I guess the second part of my question is, how do you reach out to the people in your life and try to kind of break down for them the ways that, you know, social media is like radicalizing them, and how do you reach people in like this really tangible way?
It's such a good question, and I think so many people always say that they're struggling with that too. And you know, the first thing is that actually you said it at the end of the question. These conversations go very differently when you speak to someone face to face than when they're just like some kind of collection of pixels on a screen that you can scream at and like read their comments in the least generous way possible. So I think having conversations in person like actually does allow you to more fully understand that people are complicated and can even be contradictory, or can evolve, or can simply disagree with you, but it doesn't mean that you can't share a meal. I've actually had that experience quite a lot. I mean, in my own life, I have met a variety of institutions, and I think it's actually helped me a bit. I teach at an extremely small, like progressive, small liberal arts college, Bard. It's upstate New York, where the politics would be extremely progressive among the faculty, as well as the student body. But then I'm also I'm a fellow at a conservative think tank in Washington D.C., where I'm the only woke person there. I mean, you know, like, and that's interesting. That's actually been really eye-opening. I've been there for 5 years, and one of the things that really struck me is, you know, I had been at the New York Times for some years before joining the Atlantic, and at the New York Times, you know, you could say something that was considered slightly to the center of the correct progressive position, and you could not have lunch with that person that's disagreeing with you. But you go to a conservative think tank and you disagree about some fundamental core belief they have, like abortion or something, and they're like, well, would you like to get a drink? And I've really thought a lot about that. I think it's because conservatives have so long not felt that they dictate the norms of society. I think it's changing a bit now because there's a kind of, for the first time in my life that I'm aware of, there's a kind of cultural shift to the right, where they're exerting not just political power, but shaping some norms, perhaps. But for a long time, they were out in the wilderness, so they didn't have the kind of, I don't think they didn't have the luxury of like not having a drink with everybody that disagreed with them. And so there's a kind of, there's a sense that I found that, you know, people whose politics I don't agree with, I actually like quite a lot interpersonally, and that actually we have quite a lot of overlap on some values and things like that, and you can build that way. And I think that the left has to get a lot better at going out and talking to people. You know, this is the other thing, like for the leadership and the politicians, I mean, it is actually crazy that Kamala Harris wouldn't go on these podcasts and talk to people and present her case to people that were willing to give her 3 hours to make it, you know? I think a huge part of what Trump did in the final weeks was he sat down with all of these people, and, you know, he is not a normal guy, but he actually came across as more normal than the woman who wouldn't ever get away from her kind of prepared remarks and just listen to you and respond in real time. So I think that everybody has to get better at putting themselves in situations where they talk to people that's not in their bubble. That's easier offline than online.
Do you feel that in France there is a polarization rising, like in the US, with the extreme left and the extreme right giving the tone of politics in France? Do you feel that?
I feel that the right has been gaining power, or getting momentum, and that they have destigmatized the far right to a degree that wasn't the case when I first was a student there. And then you also have, a kind of ascendant left also. But I'm struck by the way that the French can still be sensible. Like when they decided that they didn't want the far right to win, they just all came together and made a coalition to block that, which is exactly what Americans should have been able to do.
Yeah, but don't you think that's what you criticize in your book is embodied by the extreme left in France? By Mélenchon.
Mélenchon, I'm not a fan of, but many people came together and they figured out who had a better chance in what district to defeat the RN, right? And I think that is, that was pragmatic and it was effective and it was admirable. And I also think about the kind of intense polarization that we have here that plays out in ways that are not even obviously political. I spent, the COVID-19 months in 2020 in the west of France at a friend's house. And what was amazing was that no one wanted to wear masks or do any of the stuff that Americans were getting very upset about. But the mask never became an emblem of how you vote or your political identity. Whereas in America, it quickly devolved into you're either a leftist or you're with a mask on, or you're obviously a conservative because you're not wearing a mask, and then you hate the people in masks and vice versa. And the French were just like, I don't know if masks work. We have to wear masks. No one likes this. I need to buy groceries, and so it made me feel that there is not the intensity of polarization there yet, at least.
Reassuring. Okay. Other questions?
Could I ask, I'm wondering if you might articulate a bit more about the team you might want to be on. And I think I'm convinced by some of your critique of the team dynamics and maybe that in itself you see as a problem, but if there was a table you would sit at, maybe Albert Camus would join you, but
that would be nice.
If you might say the type of inspirational crowd you might want to be around.
Yeah, I mean, I would call, this is the word that excites no one, but I would say like liberals, in the expansive sense of that, people who believe that politics is not zero sum, that if you lose an election, it's not a permanent loss. Your enemy doesn't have to be defeated by any means necessary. You can even, you can debate your enemy, try to convince them, persuade people who believe in, the open society, believe in incremental progress, not this kind of, there's a sense where I think progressives get very tired with liberals, they get bored with liberals because the fierce urgency of now, it has no time to wait for, for debate and negotiation. And, you saw that there was a kind of a willingness to say that, like we're in a state of emergency, the right is fascist, and so we can't indulge in things like freedom of expression. And of course, that sword gets picked up and used against you in a few years. But so I would say I'd be with the kind of the people that I think are the inheritors of the practices and norms that make these Western societies work so well. That's the table I'd want to sit at. It seems to me that it's a dying breed, and that it actually is. People are aging out of liberalism. It seems like a lot of the kind of writers I'm thinking of who identify as liberals are much older than the kind of energized young right and the energized young left, and so that makes me worry a bit. This is a kind of small table, whoever would be there.
Thank you.
So if there is no other question, I think we will thank Thomas a lot